Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the latest version of the Tim May podcast, coming to you from high above downtown Columbus. At one point, I thought this was the capital of college football. I think that changed on Saturday night. The capital became Austin, Texas, and quickly moved to Baton Rouge, if you were paying attention. But I digress. You know, we're going to talk about a lot of things on this show today, including Ohio State's dominating victory over Indiana. That's who they play this week. Over University of Cincinnati on Saturday, 42-0. Who saw that coming? Well, a few of us maybe did. But then headed into Big Ten play. How's Ohio State prepared? I'll talk that over with Austin Ward. But before that, I want to get to my special guest of the day, and I do appreciate him coming on. He's a veteran of the Canadian Football League. Before that, he played at the University of Nebraska. Before that, I think he spent 1 year at Ole Miss, which made him and me mortal enemies for a moment, since everybody knows I grew up an Alabama fan. But I think people know, and he was also a longtime defensive coordinator and defensive coach in college football, including at Ohio U. But I think most people know this still young man, Jim Burrow, by his association of being the father of Joe Burrow, who probably is leading the Heisman Trophy race at this early juncture in the season. Jim, Tim May, man, welcome to my show.
Thanks for having me. I was looking forward to it when you texted me yesterday.
You know, I'm thinking you're still hoarse from Saturday night. Am I right about that? I mean, the shots of you in the stands with I think your wife and I think one of your sons, whatever, y'all were going crazy, especially after after that ridiculous step up and pass by Joe that kind of clinched the game. Put us there, man. Put us in that stadium on Saturday night. What was it like for you and your family?
Just an awesome experience to be able to be there. The Texas crowd was loud and it was crazy in there. And there's been times where I do miss coaching, but that was one of those nights where I said, that's why I retired, to be able to be there and really to experience that. I've never really been able to cheer as a fan or as a dad. Most of the time in high school, I was able to watch some games, but at the college level, I was only able to go to 3 last year, and
wow.
So it was great. We were going to every game and have plans and tailgates all set up. So it's a great experience.
Jim, that's like me. I am semi-retired. I basically retired at the end of the year last year from the Columbus Dispatch. But when people still offer you money to do something like this, you do it, right? So I jumped at this.
Well, that's right. I need to get me one of those. Gigs. I'm actually on the Baton Rouge ESPN every Tuesday morning also. So I'm gonna have to flip that around and get my own show.
Heck yeah, man! I would. That's called. This is the moment you parlay, brother. But the bottom line is, you retired from coaching at the end of the year last year. Great run, especially with Frank Solich down at Ohio U. But you did it purposely to be able to do this, didn't you? More than anything else, to see your son play.
Yeah. There's really no reason for me to quit coaching. I'm in good health and got a great relationship with Coach Solich, and it's a program we've developed, and they got a heck of a team this year, picked to win the conference. So just started thinking about it. I've never even been to a game in Baton Rouge. All 3 games that I saw last year were away, and my wife had gone to every game, and it was tough on her to work all week, travel on Friday, come back on Sunday, and I just started thinking about it after our bowl game last year, and it was a struggle to decide. But middle of February, I went in and told Coach I just wanted to be able to be a dad and support Joe in his senior year down at LSU. So it's worked out good so far.
Hey, take me back in your memory machine to the first time you saw little Joe Burrow throw a football or do anything where you said, "Hey, you know what? This kid's got some talent. This kid might be special." When was that moment? You and I've talked about this once before, but take people back to when you remember seeing something about him that told you he might be special as an athlete.
Well, I had seen my two older boys play football growing up, and usually, the quarterbacks just hand the ball off. You put your best athlete at running back, and they just roll. And I started watching Joe in third and fourth grade here in Athens, and the next thing I know that the coach here had him dropping back, and he had a set of twins that are now the starting tight ends for Ohio, the Lettermen brothers.
Yeah.
And he was throwing the ball not 5-yard hitches. He was throwing corner routes and post routes and those type things. So third or fourth grade, I'm thinking, that's pretty impressive for someone at that age to be able to throw the ball downfield. And so then I'm going, he's going to be a pretty good quarterback. So, and he grew up with a ball in his hand. So, I mean, it probably shouldn't have come as a surprise, but it was still pretty special to think, yeah, that's a good thing they got going out there.
Yeah. And that's my boy. Right. I mean,
yeah. And then they, they started spreading them out more and more as they became older. So you just saw an evolution every year of him being able to literally throw the ball downfield, and
wow.
It was fun to watch. And yeah, it was impressive to watch his coaches design that. But then yeah, you say, well, that's Joe out there, and he's got a chance to be pretty good one of these days.
Well, let's jump forward, man. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I remember when Ohio State started recruiting him, and I remember having a discussion with Tom Herman one time because there were a lot of people that thought Ohio State was going to sign this kid from California, who was high on the list and was getting some publicity. But Tom Herman stood steadfast on wanting to pursue your son for Ohio State, and obviously Ohio State signed him. But do you remember having that conversation with Tom at one point to where it did become obvious to you that Ohio State was very serious about your kid?
Yeah. So what happened in the spring after Joe's junior year, we knew there was a lot of interest, and he started already getting a lot of scholarship offers, but a lot of the schools wanted to see him throw, and so we didn't want him to have to throw every day, and then we didn't want somebody just popping in and said, hey, can Joe throw? So we, through his high school quarterback coach, Nathan White, who's now the head coach here, they set up two throwing opportunities per week for anybody to come in. So, we had people from really all over the country that to stop by and say, hey, we're coming to watch Joe throw. And then so Tom calls and says, I'll be there. I think it was a Thursday. And I actually didn't want to be around, and so I drove up on the hill there at Athens High to kind of watch from afar.
Yeah. And
I'm watching it, and I'm going, this may be one of his best days that I've been able to see, and Joe will tell you it's the best he's ever thrown. And so then right after that, Tom started calling us really every week and saying, hey, you're the guy I want. I've got to go through the process here. Coach Meyer has never offered a quarterback that he's never seen in person. He wants you to come to camp. And that was a weekly conversation. He would go to California and say, yeah, I watched the fourth-rated guy in the country today, and, there's no doubt you're better. He would go to Atlanta, to down south, Florida, and so it was obvious, and we got to trust Coach Herman, and he would just say, we got to be patient. But again, Coach Meyer wants him to throw. And then 1 week Alabama came in, Tennessee came in, and they were going to let us know the next week, what they were going to do with Joe. And I think, maybe Ohio State kind of got wind of that. And so Coach Meyer called and offered Joe, and he called us and said, hey, why did it take Joe like 10 minutes to commit? I said, he said, well, he had to let his mom and dad know that he was going to do it. And stuff. But it was a fun day, but Coach Meyer was pretty adamant up until that point that he had to see Joe throw in person before he offered. But they kind of Coach Herman got that pushed through, and as Joe said in a lot of the articles last week, he owes Tom Herman a lot, and we do as a family too.
Sure. I mean, you never know how somebody's going to be discovered. It's kind of like discovering a rock star. I mean, I like how though it's being portrayed as Athens. In the middle of nowhere. I mean, he played in a state championship game. He was a hell of a basketball player. I mean, everybody knew about your son, you know what I mean? But the competition he played against, how good was that? Well, I mean, if you can see talent, you can see talent. And, what impressed me, by the way, the day he committed, I remember this like you remember where you were when something happened, I was out doing a story on the Ohio State women's crew team, and I ended up sitting under a tree next to the Scioto River out there on Griggs Reservoir, and I called him. And Joe talked to me for a while on my cell phone. It's like one of those moments, you remember. I don't know why I remember that one, but it was cool because I liked him from the first time I ever spoke to him on the phone, and he had that twinkle in his eye, and he has that little quick laugh he does, and things like that. He just struck me as a guy that would be cool to cover, and he was. The few times we got to interact with him. Let's just jump real quickly. Because we could take forever on this. Could be a 10-hour show on the progress of Joe Burrow. But when he first got to Ohio State, he felt like he belonged, didn't he? I mean, did he? I mean, I got the impression he was pretty confident that he had made the right call and that he could handle the situation.
Yeah, he wanted to play football at the highest level. There was a long, many discussions about possibly staying here at Ohio University. He loves that, and he loves the Bobcats. But the bottom line is he wanted to play football at the highest level, and we knew that he was a work in progress, and he knew that. But it didn't take him long to in his mind to be there and think that he belonged. Every practice and scrimmage, he would become more and more confident. But he worked hard, but he's smart, and then he knew, hey, I'm not ready to play as a freshman and possibly even as a sophomore. But there came a point in time where he said, I can be the starting quarterback at Ohio State University. Coach Meyer had told him that to be the quarterback at Ohio State, you have to be able to perform at a Heisman candidate level. And there came a point in time, though, where he says, I want to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State. I'm capable of it. And that's even why he stayed that spring. I mean, there was discussion in January with Coach Meyer and Coach Day about his future and possibility of a transfer, but in his mind, he still thought he was a better quarterback than Haskins, and was willing to stay and compete. And after the spring is after that, there's long, hard thought process for Joe, and then he decided to transfer. But he knew he belonged after a bit there, and has always been very confident.
Dude, I'm telling you, the first time he impressed me, I mean, he impressed me in certain different ways. One was when Athens lost that ridiculous state championship game in Ohio Stadium, and they were giving out the awards afterwards, and Joe was in the back. He was the only one I saw that was just openly crying. You know what I mean? I mean, because he had come close to a state championship, and they hadn't gotten it done. And it just told me something about him. And then his first spring game at Ohio State, I think he was the only quarterback that wasn't wearing a black jersey. So he was live.
Oh, yeah.
And, you might have been there, but, I mean, some of the balls he put right on the money and on some plays where he was just getting whacked. And it's funny because it's a deja vu moment when he throws the seminal play of the game the other night when he stepped up and got hit, but as he threw the ball, and the kid went 60 on it with the touch for the clinching touchdown. It reminded me of a play from that spring game when he got hit but still put the ball right on the money. And I just went, man, there's something special about this guy. He's got a great arm. He could run. He's smart. You could see his moxie. His moxie just stood out. And I'm just going, but Jim, you've been coaching for a long time, and I'm just wondering, just take a seat back from being the father and being a coach. How tough is that when you've got to decide this guy plays and this guy is the backup? How tough of a moment is that when you've got guys that basically are pretty equal?
Yeah, that was a tough decision. It was never really, we haven't talked about this a whole lot, but it was really never said, you're the backup. It was,
right.
Hey, you guys are real close. You'll have a chance to compete in the spring, which he did. I've always heard that people, some people thought that Joe had played better than Dwayne. And even I saw something where Dwayne said something about how close it was. But,
yeah.
We always knew, too. Again, this is where the coach aspect, I think, maybe had some influence here, is that I knew what Dwayne had done at Michigan. I was there in person. It was impressive. And if it was as equal as they say, then we knew that the Michigan was always, and the experience of that day was always a trump card for Dwayne.
Yeah.
So just looking at the situation, but it took Joe probably about 2 weeks to really sort through it all and make that decision. But it was a tough time, but I've always admired how Joe went about that whole process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as I refer to it, your college football career is the 60 Minutes theme song, which is, it's ticking all the time. And eventually, if things don't work out, and especially in this age, maybe it's time to shake it up. I remember there was a guy from way back in the early 70s named Jim Burrow, who transferred, I think, from Ole Miss to Nebraska. Am I right about that?
That is right. So the transfer has been a part of the Burrow family way back way back in the day. So,
it's a tradition. No, I'm just messing with you, man.
But it wasn't easy then, and it wasn't easy this time. And I don't think any quarterback in this day and age says it's an easy thing to leave a place that you love. But sometimes. And Joe would tell you it was a business decision. He'd already graduated, and even now he says he looks the last 2 years at LSU it was like an internship. I mean, he's going to have his master's at the end of this semester, which is great, as for him, and we're proud of him for that. But he didn't choose LSU for academics because he already had a degree. He chose it because he wanted to play in the SEC, and LSU did not have a returning starting quarterback, and he could have gone to a lot of different places that were probably an easier transition for him, and maybe even a place where he could have been guaranteed a starting position, but again, the allure of playing in the SEC was huge for him, and LSU finally won out that decision for him.
Yeah, you've been in coaching. Like I said, I keep bringing it up. You've been in coaching for a long time. It's folly to guarantee on the level like Ohio State or on LSU for a coach to guarantee you are my guy, because things happen, right? But the bottom line is he did go down there. He did establish himself. What did Coach Orgeron, do you remember having a conversation with him of what he told you he expected from Joe? I mean, or, the challenge Joe faced to be his man. I mean, do you remember having any kind of conversation like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Coach Orgeron is a great recruiter. I give him that. He knew the buttons to push with us. He would call he would get in contact with my older boys and talk to them about it. But he just said, hey, LSU has great athletes. We do not have a returning starting quarterback. We do have returning quarterbacks and the returning backup, and they all think they're going to be the guy. So Joe's going to have to compete, but we've done our homework, and we think that there's a great possibility that he can be the guy, but he's going to have to earn it. So we respected that. The fact that they didn't just say, hey, you are the quarterback. I mean, yeah, that would have been great for us, I guess. But in reality, you knew that wasn't necessarily true if somebody hadn't said that. But
right.
He was honest. He was enthusiastic. We had a lot of discussion about the offense. I said, there's a lot of people recruiting Joe that wonders why we're even talking to LSU. So,
right.
That said, hey, he'll go hand the ball off 50 times a game and 15 passes. And they assured us that the offense was changing. As a matter of fact, when we had our big offensive meeting there on the official visit, they had every play that Joe had done out of the spread at Ohio State. Every play that he had. And then they put a play that they actually already had spliced into that video. So we were convinced that there was something to the fact that they were going to change, but I do still respect the fact that they said Joe had to compete for that job, and he did. Mm-hmm. He wasn't named the starting quarterback until really about a week before their first game.
I was going to say, Joe Burrow rubs off on you if you're around him long enough. I mean, that's just a straight fact. Did Tom Herman, was he interested at all? Because I never asked you that, but was he interested in Joe at that point, or did he kind of was set with the guy he had, right? I mean, what do you remember? Do you remember at all having a conversation with Tom?
No, but Tim Beck and I, we kind of kept in touch, and there was some talk that there was a possibility because if you remember, I think Ellinger and they were actually a couple of guys competing 2 years ago, so It wasn't as settled a while back as it became, but we never talked to Coach Herman. Again, Coach Beck and I had some conversations, but it was always, we think we're pretty good, but we'll see what happens and stuff as far as the quarterback situation. And so the bottom line was it was really never a factor. It was never a choice that we had to go to Texas.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, we'll get this done in a minute, but bottom line is last year. Last year was like going through a washing machine, I think, for Joe a little bit, as that team kind of found its way with with more of a spread offense and stuff, and you had some really good moments. When was that moment when you, as a father and a coach, felt like he had made definitely the right decision? When did you feel that way? Was it before the year? Was it? I'm talking about last year, or was it during the season?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was fortunate that we played our first game here at Ohio on a Saturday, and we had a bye, which coaches hate when you have a bye the second week of the season. But I started looking at the schedule. I'm going, we play. Joe plays in the Cowboy Stadium on the kickoff classic on Sunday, and I figured we'd have a day or at least a day off as a coach because we'd grind it away from camp. And so I went to Coach Solich and said, hey, can I go to that game? And he said, yeah. So I was at that Miami game, and, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Joe got into a little tussle with the Miami people before the game. And so right then I said, he's bought into this full speed ahead. And so I figured then that he made the right choice. And then, they had that game, but then the final final thing probably was the Auburn game.
Mm-hmm.
And, they were basically going down to defeat, and Joe hit that long pass, and, just to see the joy that I saw in some videos in that locker room after that game convinced me that he had made the right choice.
All right, let's go back again now. You're sitting in DKR, Darrell K. Royal Memorial Stadium on Saturday night. Your family's there. This game gets underway. Like everybody else does, this is sort of a defining moment, not only for these two teams, but maybe for these two quarterbacks. And the two quarterbacks, I thought that was a hell of a duel. But what's it like as a father sitting there and watching your son? The whole nation is watching. I mean, he's still got buku fans in Columbus, who love Joe Burrow. But to watch him compete, not just compete, but win, step up and make plays on that level and that atmosphere with everything on the line this early in a football season. What's that like, Jim?
Well, you're proud to know that your son is out there in that big moment for sure. You're excited to the point of being nervous for sure.
Yeah.
And but just knowing that, for me, that was when I also knew that I'd made the right decision to retire, being able to experience that. And, as a dad, I'd always been in as many games as I possibly could, but, I was still coaching, but that was probably the first big game like that, hey, I'm here truly as a dad. And of course, then he throws an interception early, and you become even more nervous there. Yeah. You got over 100,000 people kind of screaming, but Joe's he's a competitor, and I figured he'd fight back, which he did. But just an awesome experience to be able to to be sitting at that game, even though they put us in the worst seat and possible at the Texas at the stadium there. But that's okay. Just to be there was really unbelievable, and it's a game that will be part of Joe's legacy, I'm sure, and a big part of what we'll talk about as a family for many years to come.
Hey man, on television, they kept showing these up close looks of him there in the when the game was on the line in the balance, and he just had a cool and a calm about him. That he was made for that moment. And I'm going to tell you, there were moments when he kind of had that, like, I don't want to get too far out on a limb here, but kind of had that Tom Brady look about him. It's like he relished that moment. I mean, did you sense that too? I mean, as you watched.
Yeah, I mean, the people around here, of course, still talk about the Toledo Central Catholic game, which you brought up, the state championship, and that was about as tough circumstances as you can be in as a quarterback, and he had a great game, and then again, games last year that he had great games were some of the toughest, the A&M, the Fiesta Bowl, the Auburn game, and so it's just it's what he does. He performed at a high level in the big basketball games, big baseball games growing up. He was a really good baseball player, and even if you go back to the spring games, which for him were big games because he hadn't played very much, and in every spring game, if you look at the statistics, he played great, and so just who he is, and it's been a big part of how he's played for a long time, and we're really proud of that.
Hey, real quick before you go, what story that came out last week that really bothered me, just because I don't see this as the situation. Maybe I don't think you do either, but one writer referred to Joe as a cast-off from Ohio State, and I don't remember it being that way at all. And I mentioned it to Ryan Day, and Ryan Day was pretty rankled at that observation. Like he said, Joe's come by and visited with him at least a couple of times since since he left and stuff. And like I was going back to that. Well, only one guy can play quarterback deal, and you do have to finally make that decision and stuff. But I think Joe still probably has some fondness, right, about Ohio State. I mean, what's the take there?
Yeah, I mean, I know that the writer that did that, and most of those guys that become friends with me from last year. I didn't do any interviews the whole year. I chose not to. But this year, I've kind of opened up, and I don't think he meant it like that. So, but if it came across like that, no, they never told Joe to leave. They always said he had a spot at Ohio State. Once again,
right.
They even said he would have a shot in the summer to beat out Dwayne. It was solely Joe's choice, and we counseled him as a mom and dad, as a family. But Joe chose to leave, and there's still a good relationship with Ryan Day and Coach Meyer. I'm sure, because I got a text from Coach Meyer. I'm sure Joe did, and we saw the embrace that he had with Tom Herman after the game. And Joe respects Ohio State and all those coaches, and certainly Coach Herman. And so that's a good thing, though, when you can choose to leave somewhere and still be in good graces with the former staff. And he loves those Ohio State players now that he basically grew up with. And again, my wife was showing me all these tweets from Ohio State great players that are in the NFL about Joe, and they watch the game, and that's all pretty cool. So he'll always have a feeling for Ohio State. I mean, he's a graduate there. That's where he chose to go out of high school. And again, he loves those players that he played with. And but really, again, I don't think the article was meant to say that, hey, they kicked him on the street and told him he'd never play there and that sort of thing. I don't really think that's what that was all about.
Yeah. I mean, Joe really likes Ohio State probably until they meet in the college football playoffs here in January. And it'll probably be a different story.
Well, that's a long way from
I know.
Today. But if I was going to draw that up and say what's the perfect scenario, that would be the perfect scenario is LSU versus Ohio State.
Yeah.
For the national championship.
That would be unbelievable. Hey, Jim. I know you got to go spend some of that Canadian Football League money you get now still probably because of being a veteran from up there. By the way, I wanted to ask you one quickie before you go. You played for Montreal. I mean, you were drafted by the Packers, right? And I think you played for them, 1 year, and then you went to the Canadian Football League. Do I have that right?
I did. I played for one year at Green Bay and got released and ended up with Marv Levy for that year, and then we won the Grey Cup, and then he went to the Chiefs. We played in 2 more Grey Cups and got beat by Edmonton. There was a guy named Warren Moon, the last Grey Cup that I played in. That was a factor, but 5 years up there, it was great.
Yeah, but correct me if I'm wrong. Weren't you on the same team with Tom Cousineau? I mean, am I wrong about that?
No, Tom. I call him Coos. So Coos and I were roommates on road trips. At Montreal, and we still stay in touch. He lives in Akron.
Yeah.
He's a big Joe fan. He came to one of Joe's high school games, and he was one of the best athletes I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, for a linebacker. He was the first guy picked in the draft, didn't want to play at Buffalo, and ended up with us at Montreal. So, that's a friendship that we still carry on to to this day.
That is funny because you know what? Back then, the pay in the CFL wasn't that much different from the NFL, if I remember correctly, and it was a little more lucrative in other ways. Correct? I mean, am I wrong about that?
Well, yeah, it wasn't that much different. I think Montreal did pay Tom a lot of money to come to Montreal, and but that was a good deal. Actually, Green Bay, I was teammates with John Brockington
That's right.
Steve Luke was a safety. So, I had some Ohio State connections way back in my playing days. But Tom Kuzno was a great player, and I always appreciate it because he'll speak his mind about Joe and how good he thought Joe would eventually be at Ohio State. So he's a good friend.
I got you. Oh, Jim, this has been a slice, man. I really appreciate it. This is a slice of pepperoni pizza. And, man, I might have you on later in the year, man, when it looks like the showdown is inevitable. But, Jim, I really appreciate this. Go ahead.
As I said, I'm on Baton Rouge at ESPN every Tuesday morning at I think it's 9 o'clock our time, 8 o'clock down there. They have a couple guys do a great job, and so I'm kind of the guest, and I guess they like the dad perspective and the coach perspective all kind of put together into one. But I appreciate being on, and I'll be glad to talk to you anytime.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That was Jim Burrow, father of Joe Burrow, who flashed finally to fame on Saturday night when he led Louisiana State to that stirring victory over Texas at Texas. And, you got to figure Joe Burrow is at or near the top of the Heisman Trophy, whatever poll comes out this week, and for good reasons. We're going to be back in just a moment on my podcast, my show here, and I'm going to have Austin Ward. We're going to look back and look forward for Ohio State as it beat UC and is headed to Indiana this week for the Big Ten opener. By the magic of television, ladies and gentlemen, and audio, radio, download radio and audio, my friend Boston, call him Austin Ward, has shown up on the set.
I think you got that backwards.
By the way, it was a great interview I had with Jim Burrow, man. I've always liked that guy. I liked him before I ever knew Joe Burrow.
What a freaking performance on Saturday night.
Oh, yeah, it was crazy. I mean, the one that – you can say the one that got away. Well, he was in the net. He jumped out of the net and went to another net. And LSU is definitely making the most of Joe Burrow on the transfer. And as I pointed out, things worked out pretty well for Dwayne Haskins Jr. last year. Things look like they're working out pretty well for Justin Fields. It looks like life goes on in this transfer world.
And that's – you got to give those guys credit, too, because not everywhere is going to be a perfect fit. We talked about that before the season. Jalen Hurts, we see what he's doing with Oklahoma. That looks like it's going to work out pretty well. But then you also have situations like Tate Martell where it doesn't quite fit, and you maybe made a bad choice. But Joe Burrow, I remember when that conversation was coming up, that team that was in the horseshoe on Saturday, Cincinnati, wanted him desperately to help push him over the top. And they got in that last couple, too. But I was a little bit surprised that he left the state and went to LSU, but my goodness, that's working out for him.
He wanted that Power 5 shot.
Can't blame him.
In what's considered, by some, the best Power 5 conference out there. I think the SEC West is reasserting itself to a certain extent this year. I think the Big Ten East is still pretty stout. But the bottom line is, he wanted that, and he has risen to that occasion and then some. And, do you agree Saturday night performance at Texas probably elevates him highly in the Heisman Trophy talk?
It has to for September. And you're looking at all these guys who've been transfer quarterbacks are in that mix. Joe Burrow, Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts that I already mentioned. You know that Trevor Lawrence is going to be there. You know that Tua is going to be there. Really just all these guys are sort of interconnected too. You got Lawrence and Fields with the Elite 11. It's like you got to have these guys anymore. I think that if you're going to win the national championship, you have to have one of the elite 4 or 5 guys that exist at quarterback in college football. And I thought that I said this a bunch of times last year, Tim, that if Joe Burrow had been Ohio State's quarterback, I think they could have had the same season. I don't know if they could have won the Big Ten. They might have lost a game. I don't know if he would have had 50 touchdowns the way that Dwayne Haskins did. The offense would have looked a little different.
You know where he would have made a difference, definitely. I don't want to talk about that too long because I want to talk about UC and India. But you know where he would have made a difference, for example, is in that game at Purdue. because Joe Burrow can run.
Can run, yeah.
And I mean, he's sneaky good runner.
You're right.
And he's tough. And so maybe, they would have found something there that would have been a little different than – because, remember, Dwayne missed about 3 passes that would have turned that game around by just inches. I mean, a half beat off because that wind was blowing and stuff. But you're right. I mean, life goes on is the way I look at it. I mean, people can hypothetical all they want. Joe Burrow found a home. He has found stardom like, I really thought he would, even when he was wearing that Dellavedova way too small T-shirt. And Dwayne Haskins Jr. clearly was a first-round draft pick by the Washington Redskins. It's really funny, and you mentioned Jalen Hurts. I think Chip Kelly probably woke up screaming last night from a dead sleep, seeing Jalen Hurts coming at his UCLA team here.
At least Chip Kelly's sleeping on a pile of money. So.
Yeah, bingo. At least he's cushy. But bottom line is, real quick, your biggest takeaway from that UC game, let me give you mine. Ohio State dominated in all 3 phases.
Yep.
Do not discount Drew Chrisman in the punt game. What's your takeaway?
Yeah, Drew Chrisman was the Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week. We can throw that in there now. That's official. But that wasn't my number one takeaway. I think when that
wasn't my number one either, but I just threw it in there.
When I processed what happened on Saturday, Tim, I think the defense – that's legit. And you wrote about the shutout. That's certainly significant. But for me, I thought it was key that J.K. Dobbins bounced back the way he did. There was a lot. It was public and private, the challenge that he was getting last week.
Yeah.
He was missing holes. It looked like that old mentality where he was trying to make too much happen. He was maybe worried when the score got out of hand and he wanted touches. I think that impacted him. That happens to guys. They're human. But he attacked it. The way he ran on that 60-yard touchdown. He had another one, I think, earlier in the game that was 25 yards or so.
Yeah.
But then that block, that shows you that he was being a selfless teammate for Justin Fields because that ball was never going to go into his hands on that play. And he went.
That was a captain play.
It was the kind of play that Zeke used to make.
Yes.
And that's sort of been missing. Mike Weber was a great all-around player. I was always high on him. I thought he deserved a bigger role. It doesn't matter now. But J.K. Dobbins needs to go out and make those Zeke-type plays because a lot of what he did was he would – early on, he would play on special teams, and he was willing to throw his body around as a blocker and do it all. J.K. Dobbins did that on Saturday.
Zeke would have made an NFL team as a special teams player. Absolutely. I mean, he's that kind of – when he's on the field, that's why it was important for the Cowboys to re-sign him because he brings something extra. He brings an edge that a lot of the prima donna kind of backs don't. I mean, I would say he is a prima donna, but when he's on the field –
he never gets credit for that.
When he's on the field, he is a consummate team player. And yeah, you're right. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And, the other thing that J.K., I think, has to realize, he's not Derrick Henry. He's J.K. Dobbins, meaning he's not going to run over a lot of guys, but he can, make you miss and be patient and let the guys in front of him make the blocks, and the stuff is going to be there. This offensive line took a big step from the opener when they were graded champions. It'd be funny if this week they're not.
I would be surprised if they aren't.
But that was and of course Justin Fields, man, he looked so much different. And I know these are degrees we're talking about. He looked just in command on Saturday against UC, against a defense that was bringing more players from all over the place. He seemed in command. He seemed pretty well aware, with a few exceptions on plays, of what was going on in front of him and beside him, which is key, and made some plays. And he accounted for 4 touchdowns, I think, 2 passing, 2 rushing.
9 through 2 weeks.
Yeah, 9 through 2 weeks. Look out, Dwayne Haskins Jr., J.T. Barrett, he's on your tail. But and then defensively, what to be said? I mean, I wrote a little story about it for LettermenRow.com. A shutout is the ultimate measure of a defense. As even, Greg Madison said, the ultimate measure, the way he looked at it from last year, as bad as the Ohio State defense was, 13-1, that's pretty good. But when you're 2-0 and one of those twos has an O with it, that's as I told Joe Hollis one time when he was the offensive coordinator at Ohio State one year, and they went up and got beat 28-0 at Michigan. And he was kind of complaining about how the defense played that day. And I said, well, Joe, you know what? I haven't seen a team win a game yet that didn't score at least 1 point. And he goes, good point, Tim. But when you shut out somebody, you've got a shot against anybody.
Yeah, and you talked about it too. Like, Chase Young is absolutely unblockable right now. And we've seen this happen. Burrow was telling us when he walked off the field, there's a legit debate now. How do you think he stacks up with Nick and Joey Bosa? He's got a long season to go.
Different player, but you're right.
But it's crazy to watch him work right now. And you and I have also had this conversation, so I won't belabor it. But the willingness for him to drop out into coverage, to play some of these screens and defend it, and not just be a straight-ahead pass rusher at all times, completely changes Ohio State's defense. Because if you're Cincinnati or if you're Indiana, you still have to plan to send two guys.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, suddenly these two guys have nothing to do.
They sent a double team after him on Saturday, and only one of them touched it.
And they also sent a double team to him, and he dropped out to defend the screen and sent Sean Wade flying around the backside with no one to pick him up and force the fumble.
And they even ran a little stunt with him where he took the guy wide on a play. Malik Harrison blitzed through the hole that created, and Chase Young still beat him to the quarterback. I mean, it was a field day for Chase Young, I mean, that ought to be a video. He ought to show his grandchildren a long time from now when he is a number one draft pick. This is why, real quickly, because we're going to talk about Indiana as this week goes on.
Absolutely.
What's just your initial take on Indiana? Tom Allen, they're 2-0, but 2-0 over Ball State and always tough Eastern Illinois.
I was always skeptical of that hire when you had the situation where Kevin Wilson is forced out or parts ways. I think he did an okay job as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
And obviously you referenced, there's that shutout for them. I don't think that there's that fear of the Indiana offense anymore. I know there's a new quarterback in there, and they're very excited about what Penix is doing.
Yeah.
But, they're not going to challenge Ohio State in my mind with that offense. And I don't think that the personnel on defense has any real shot if Justin Fields, J.K. Dobbins, and that offensive line show up ready to play. So we'll talk about Indiana on Wednesday night when we get together for our practice report, or we can talk about them more. But right now, as I sit here, just those first two games don't do anything to me to say Indiana might be a contender. If you'd asked me if I thought that about Maryland, my opinion has changed on them, but for the Hoosiers, no.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll talk about that on Wednesday, but it is interesting. Ohio State is only a two-touchdown favorite. That's interesting to me. I mean, you always – because those guys that set those lines, they kind of know what they're talking about. You don't want to believe it.
I think there's this perception that Ohio State struggles with Indiana, and sometimes they play sloppy early. But even 2 years ago they still wound up just absolutely crushing.
Well, that was when we first saw the weave. Yeah. And we saw the J.K. Dobbins jump cut.
Yep.
If he can get back to that, man, like I said, don't take them on. Beat them to the edge.
Make them miss.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the Tim May podcast wrap up for this week. I've really enjoyed it. I really want to thank Jim Burrow, one of my favorite people out there, for coming on and talking about watching his son, Joe Burrow, rise to, let's face it, that genie is out of the bottle now. and that was fun to watch, wasn't it?
Yeah. And by the way, let's get rid of the DBU nonsense with Texas and LSU.
Yeah.
Neither one of them stopped a quarterback on Saturday night. Ohio State is DBU. You look at the results, there's no argument to me.
They showed a shot of Joe one time on the sidelines, and in the background there was a little case there holding these practice footballs that had DBU on one of them. I went, wow, man, they stole that ball from Ohio State. Kerry Combs was going crazy.
Malik Hooker yesterday.
By the way, Kerry Combs was going crazy on Sunday on the sidelines, man, when Malcolm Butler had that.
Lots of Ohio State defensive backs flashing on Sunday.
As I tweeted, you could only see the back of Kerry Combs' head, but it was going crazy. You know what I mean? Wow. Be careful what you wish for sometimes. Back to reality for the Cleveland Browns.
Well, you're going to
fans.
start a new show now here. You thought you were wrapping it up.
Yeah, I was. But I get carried away. I digress, man. That's why I want to name it, but I digress. But we'll be back next week with another Tim May podcast. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.